Everyone. My name is Amanda Kriegel, and today we are going to review my assessment analysis and process reflection portfolio. I can't wait to take you along on this journey. First, let's start off with student background. My student is named Paulina. Of course, this is a pseudonym to preserve her privacy. I currently teach her as a third grade dual language teacher, and she is in the third grade dual language classroom. So for half of the day, I teach her English, and the other half, my colleague teaches her Spanish. Paulina has been in the dual language program since second grade, so that is now 2 consecutive years, this being her second year. Previously, Paulina attended school from kindergarten to first grade in a mainly Spanish classroom setting, so there was very little English that was spoken in that classroom. Paulina mostly speaks Spanish at home with her family, and she comes with a very thick, beautiful accent, as does her mother, and some English, sometimes with her mother, but also with older siblings and friends. Paulina's parents are also learning English, and they do their very best to support Paulina's learning at home by incorporating English reading and some different types of activities. The first assessment I used to assess Paulina was oral language. She was given two different types of oral assessments, and that was social language and academic language. For the social language task, she was asked, "Do you have plans for spring break?" This was an open ended question, and it actually had a series of 7 interview type questions to guide her response in order to kind of prompt more of that in depth response from the initial question. Then she was also assessed based on an academic language task, which was prompted with the question, "You should pay more attention to." In other words, she would place in the person that she felt other people should start paying more attention to. And what I really liked about this task is that it was still open ended with some choice, but it was also guided as it is a persuasive and opinion task. And it was directed by a series of questions as well, again, interview type. But she also used her graphic organizer to help her explain, which we did complete in class previously. If you can see at the bottom, you can take a moment to kind of look at her scores down below that I've kind of given her based on some of her results. Going over those results, she did score a 2 for both the speaking and the listening. You can see the listening rubric is found there at the bottom, and the speaking is found off to the right. For the speaking, the reason she was given a level 2 and not a 3 is because she often used some short phrases. She kind of tried to attempt more complex language, but when she would try those complex language pieces, she often groped for language. She made many errors, and sometimes the discourse was laborious. So she would really try to really have those complex sentences, but often there were lots of pauses, lots of trying to think of the word and not able to come up with it. For the listening section, she was able to follow two-step directions, which really involved the questions that were being asked. She was able to kind of restate some of the questions that I was asking, and she was kind of limited in her ability to follow the 3-step questions, however. So when I did ask those 3-step questions, I did kind of have to separate them out in order for her to clearly respond to those. In other words, she was also able to respond to the main idea of each question, but she still, again, struggled with some of those more in-depth responses, and she did need some repetition. On the academic task, she also received a 2 in both of the areas. She received a 2 in the speaking because she again used a lot of those short phrases. It was mostly comprehensible, but again, every time she would try to kind of go for that more complex language, she would kind of grope a little bit, and it wasn't very often that she did. When she also kind of struggled with the sentence structure. He should appreciate, she helps a lot. That's kind of what she said. And so that kind of shows that she was kind of struggling with expressing that idea. The same thing can be seen when she was trying to deliver her thesis, which she stated as, "My brother, because he doesn't pay attention to my cousin," rather than directly responding to the prompt, "You should pay more attention to," and kind of completing that sentence. She needed more repetition with this task than the previous social task as well. So that's kind of important to note. A little bit of a difference in her abilities there. And then for listening, it was difficult to kind of hear Paulina's her train of thought. Often she was using her graphic organizer, and she did have reasons. However, she was missing a third of her reasons. She only had two main ones, and did repeat one of her second reasons one time. So she thought that she had three, but she actually only had two. She definitely needed more teacher redirection at this point to make it more understanding, which is again why she got a score of a 2 at this point. In terms of the reading, Paulina was given 3 types of reading assessments. The first reading assessment she was given was a Reading A to Z book. It was a Level E nonfiction, and it was titled Caring for Earth. This book was really great because we have had different activities throughout our school participating in a special celebration of Earth Day. We actually had a really special Earth Day school project where students were gathering like egg cartons and tissue boxes, and then they went outside and gathered lots of seeds. And they participated with a naturist who helped us create like a seed quilt. And we're actually this Saturday going to be planting that seed quilt into the ground to allow flowers to grow at our school. So all of this was very familiar to Paulina. Also, the assessment was very similar to a Fountas and Pinnell assessment, which she is given regularly, up to 2 times a year, possibly more. For the vocabulary assessment, Paulina was asked to match vocabulary words and pictures from the Caring for Earth book. So what she was actually given was words that were separate and then pictures that were attached to a definition. And these vocabulary terms were things like difference, earth, electricity, recycle, all those kind of terms that she's been already familiar with through our discussions about helping the earth throughout school. This was also developed based on her current WIDA access level, which was a level 2. For the grammar assessment, again, we used the same book, The Caring for Earth. The sentences were pulled directly from there. This time, Paulina was asked to use the pronoun we in place of 2 or more people or subjects. So, for example, we would take place of my sister and I. So that was kind of the background on her grammar assessment as well. In terms of her reading assessment scores, her overall score, again, was a 2. So I have 2 rubrics on here. One is the WIDA can-do descriptors, and then the rubric stages of reading development. So when we look at them a little bit closely, and look at the 3 different types of assessments that Paulina was given, in reading, she was given at 80, she read 87 words, but she read them at 75 words per minute, which is slower than the average. Typically, we want to see about 100 words per minute, but it's not a huge concern. As we know, as they increase in their levels, usually so does their fluency. This being said, she did have 13 errors and 2 self-corrections. So we always want to celebrate the self-corrections. However, the 13 errors were mostly due to the part that she said earth as earth. So she said the TH as an F instead. And this accounts for approximately 97% of her errors. I know this repetition of this mistake is it is a very high indicator of a level 2 emerging, because she is kind of making some more of those mistakes. She is making those connections. However, she's still kind of stumbling over some of them. She also does use picture clues to help her figure out some of the bigger words like electricity and helping her sound those out. But she is still, at the end of her reading, she still did make some errors as she was reading, which made some mistakes in the meaning of the words as well. In her vocabulary, she actually scored 100% correct. So she was able to correctly match all of the words with the definition and picture. She was able to physically manipulate this, so I actually cut them out and I allowed for Paulina to match them by moving them around. And this really tells me that she can be pushed to the next level, maybe perhaps with less visuals or maybe just like the words instead. The grammar portion, Paulina was only adequately successful. She was only technically 50% successful. She had trouble including and during this time she only circled things like the two subjects. So let me give that example a little bit further. What we wanted to see was we and then circling my sister and I, for instance. However, Paulina can be seen circling just my sister, I. So she kind of missed the and there instead of the whole circling the whole phrase my sister and I. So that was very interesting to me because it still kind of shows that she understands that we is replacing the two subjects. But even when I kind of read it aloud to her a little bit and I said, okay, does we and planting make sense? And she said yes. So it seems like there's a little miscommunication, a little misunderstanding there. So I know she would benefit from some more redirection there as well. For the next assessment, we assessed her writing, and Paulina was given two different types of writing assessments. She was given a social writing task and an academic writing task. For the social writing task, she was asked to respond and finish the prompt, I wish my teachers knew. Now I know what you're thinking, this is a very open-ended response. However, throughout the whole year, we've been practicing responding to very open-ended and giving more detail. So this is something they're very used to. Also, at this point of the year, they've really gotten to know me, so I know they're more comfortable with kind of sharing some of those more personal things in response to I wish my teachers knew. This essentially led to this is a narrative paragraph because it allows things to be chronological, it allows different dialogue of different characters, those type of things. And the academic writing task was focused mostly on you should pay more attention to. So this kind of comes up because in the beginning we use this also as the oral assessment prior to her fully writing out her paragraphs, and this is a persuasive opinion essay. It's also directed by the use of her graphic organizer, as we saw previously as well. Please go ahead and take a moment to look at the scoring that she received in this area. In this area, Paulina did score a 2 in social writing and a 2 in academic writing. And I'm going to go over just why. So here you'll see the rubric of the WIDA Consortium. This is grades 1 through 12, and as you know, Paulina is 3rd grade level. So when I was looking at her writing, some things really stood out. As she chose to write about, I was very surprised by some of the students writing, I wish my teacher knew, and I really recommend that everyone do this because you can really learn a lot about a student based on whatever they decide to share. But Paulina decided to share about her cat actually dying, and she kind of ended it in a positive note by saying that she ended up getting a dog, and she was very excited about that too. However, in her writing, I did notice that there was a lot of short phrases, repeating of similar words. So she would say like, it was so sad, it was sad, that repetition. She did put it in chronological order, so her story did make sense in that way. However, there was no attempt at paragraphing. And on the same breath, she did use some transitional phrases. So she said at first instead of first, second. So that shows me she's beginning a level 3, she's starting to become a little more complex. In terms of her comprehensibility, it was greatly impeded with her spelling errors, unfortunately. I was only able to really understand what Paulina was writing because I have had the past history with working with Paulina. And I know that that wouldn't be the case with some other teachers. So I was very careful to be as unbiased as possible while still seeing and having her read aloud her ideas to me, just to make sure I understood that she was also able to communicate ideas, but also keeping in mind this might not be the same case for everyone who would read Paulina's work without talking to her. So for that reason, she was also placed at a level 2 for her social task, which you can see on this graphic in purple. For the academic task, she had some attempt at organizing, but this was primarily due to her using her graphic organizer for help. She did use simple sentences to provide the details, like "she is fun," and she kind of left off the subject on a lot of her sentences. So there was that as well, some grammar errors too. Sometimes this made her sentences difficult to understand, and again, her spelling impeded that comprehensibility. She was able to complete her sentences when asked to read it aloud. However, it was not always seen through her writing, and again, I was trying to be as unbiased as possible, while still keeping in mind that she is really working hard to deliver those ideas. So I wanted to give credit on both sides again. I did notice in this one that she chose some specific words like energetic. If she had not read the words aloud, I would not have known that that word was energetic that she had written down. So it's good that I had her read it aloud. However, I am still keeping in mind that this is not clearly communicated through her writing. So taking that into account, she would be placed at a level 2 for this one as well, because it kind of lacks the overall advanced vocabulary, as she's still using some of those simplistic sentences, and she's still kind of impeded by the spelling mistakes and some of those grammar errors and structural errors as well. For the next assessment, this was Paulina's self-assessment, which I really got a lot of information from. Paulina was given 2 types of self-assessments. The first was an oral language self-assessment, and the second was a reading self-assessment. The first one was a series of statements asked to assign a level, not very well, okay, well, or very well, to what can you do in English. And I've attached a little picture at the bottom just to give you a piece of reference. What I really enjoyed about this one was that it had a comment section, and every time I asked Paulina, or I stated the statement for her, I also allowed for her to give comments as well. From this oral language self-assessment, I was very surprised with her placement of very well for all categories except the first one, which is I can ask questions in class. I'm not surprised by this answer, as she states she's very shy, but it was really interesting to hear her take on why she felt she received that score. It was also interesting to hear the other responses and the comments to that as well. I'm also wondering that maybe she scored herself a little bit higher because I was listening in. So I'm wondering if this self-assessment is as accurate as it could be, and I would be very interested in seeing if other students would take the self-assessment in a different way if I'm not like working one-on-one with them. I was also interested in the way she scored herself for participating in group, as this is not really seen in class, and she marked it as very well, understanding others in group. I've seen her working more with other students as of recently, but again, very interesting. And then I also learned from Paulina that she does a lot of work at home, and she has a lot of supports, and she actually talks with her sister on the phone in English very often. So a lot of things that I did not know about Paulina, I got to learn through her oral self-assessment. Then we have her reading self-assessment. So again, this was a series of statements that she could respond to most of the time, sometimes or not very often. And she was trying to figure out which one is most true for her. So I was very surprised that she marked most of the time for every category except for when she marked sometimes for I read easy books. This makes me think because she's at a level E, according to her Fontes and Pinnell, that other books might seem more difficult to her. So maybe she just feels like she doesn't really encounter those lower, below E, easier books, which could definitely be the case in third grade, as most students are or should be around level M at this point. I was very interested to learn that at home she does read a lot and she does practice writing down exact words from a whole page of a book. She'll write down the title and the words word for word on her own. I think she also has a misconception about what it means to write about books, as this isn't really writing and it's more copying. So I would like to break that misconception with her in the future.